Millionaire dies of terminal illness and leaves a letter. My Annie, never take off this bracelet. Before the story begins, wherever life has placed you today, this message is for you. The rain drummed against the windows of Thornfield Manor like desperate fingers climbed for entry. 14-year-old Annie Thornfield sat in her father's old study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the lingering scent of his cologne. 7 years had passed since Richard Thornfield's death, yet she still felt his presence in this room. Her fingers traced the delicate silver bracelet that never left her wrist, the final gift from a dying father. The inscription was barely visible now. My Annie, never remove this. Your loving father, R.T. She remembered that terrible December morning when the hospice nurse had placed the sealed envelope in her small 7-year-old hands, her father's body still warm beneath the hospital sheets. Annie, her stepmother Catherine's shrill voice echoed through the mansion's halls. Get down. Here this instant. Annie's jaw tightened. Catherine had married her father just 6 months before his death, swooping in like a vulture when the cancer had weakened him. Now she controlled everything, the fortune, the estate, even Annie's daily life. Coming, Annie called back, but she didn't move. Instead, she opened the worn envelope for the 1000th time, reading her father's final words in his familiar handwriting. My precious Annie, this bracelet is more than jewelry. It's your inheritance, your protection, and your future. Promise me you'll never take it off, no matter what anyone tells you. Trust no one completely, not even those who claim to love you. When you turn 18, seek out Marcus Webb at Webb & Associates. He has instructions that will change everything. Until then, be brave, be smart, and remember, appearances can deceive. I love you beyond measure. Dad, the bracelet had always felt slightly warm against her skin, though Annie assumed it was just body heat. Lately, though, she'd noticed something strange. In certain lights, tiny symbols seemed to shimmer beneath the silver surface, like hidden messages waiting to be decoded. A thunderclap shook the house, and Annie jumped. Through the study window, she saw a black sedan pulling up the circular driveway. 3 men in expensive suits stepped out, their faces grim and purposeful. One of them she recognized, Detective Morrison, who had investigated some irregularities in her father's business dealings years ago. Catherine's voice grew louder, more agitated. I told you, she doesn't know anything. She was just a child. Annie's heart began racing. They were talking about her. She pressed herself against the study door, straining to hear. Mrs. Thornfield, Detective Morrison's gravelly voice carried up the stairs. We have reason to believe your stepdaughter possesses something that belongs to our investigation. Something her father may have hidden before his death. That's impossible, Catherine snapped. Richard left everything to me. The girl has nothing but some old toys and books. We'll need to search her room and question her personally. Annie's blood turned to ice. Her father's warning echoed in her mind. Trust no one completely. She looked down at the bracelet, its silver surface seeming to pulse with an inner light, whatever secret it held. People were willing to turn her world upside down to find it. Footsteps began climbing the ornate staircase. Annie had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the study. Her father had always told her she was smart and brave. Now it was time to prove it. She slipped the envelope into her jacket pocket and moved to the window. The old oak tree outside had been her escape route many times, when Catherine's anger became unbearable. But tonight felt different. Tonight, her entire life was about to change. The door handle began to turn as Annie swung her leg over the windowsill. Whatever secret her father had left her, whatever danger she was running from, one thing was certain. She would never, ever remove that bracelet. The storm swallowed her small figure as she disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known and stepping into a mystery 7 years in the making. The abandoned greenhouse behind Thornfield Manor had been Annie's secret refuge since childhood. Hidden beneath years of overgrown ivy and shattered glass, it offered perfect concealment from Catherine's watchful eyes and the investigators now ransacking her bedroom. Annie huddled in the corner where her father's prized orchids once bloomed, their ghostly silhouettes still visible in the moonlight streaming through broken panes. Her breath came in short puffs in the cold November air as she pulled out her father's letter, reading it again by the pale light of her phone. Marcus Webb at Webb & Associates, she whispered to herself. She'd never heard the name before, but her father had been deliberate about everything. If he mentioned someone in his final letter, it meant they were crucial to understanding this mystery. The bracelet felt unusually warm now, almost hot against her skin. Annie held up her wrist. examining it closely in the phone's flashlight beam. The symbols she glimpsed earlier were definitely there, tiny, intricate markings that seemed to shift and dance. When she moved the light, they looked almost like coordinates. "Where are you, you little brat?" Catherine's voice echoed from the main house, sharp with panic. She can't have gone far. Annie silenced her phone quickly. Through the greenhouse's cracked walls, she could see flashlight beams sweeping the gardens. They were searching systematically, in closer to her hiding spot with each passing minute. Her mind raced back to that awful day 7 years ago. Her father had been confined to bed for weeks, the terminal cancer stealing his strength daily. But on his final morning, he'd seemed suddenly alert, almost urgent. "Annie, my brave girl," he'd whispered, his once powerful voice reduced to a rasp. "Come here. I need to tell you something very important." She'd climbed onto his hospital bed, careful not to disturb the maze of tubes and wires. He pressed the envelope into her hands with surprising strength. "This bracelet belonged to my mother, your grandmother Elena. She gave it to me before she died, just like I'm giving it to you now. It's been in our family for generations, passed down through the women who were strong enough to bear its responsibility. At 7, Annie hadn't understood what responsibility a piece of jewelry could carry. Now, at 14, she was beginning to realize her father's gift came with dangerous strings attached. A stick snapped nearby. Annie pressed herself deeper into the shadows as Detective Morrison's voice carried through the night. "Check every outbuilding. If Richard Thornfield hid something before he died, his daughter might know where it is." "You're wasting your time," Catherine replied. But her tone had changed. There was something calculating in it now, something that made Annie's skin crawl. "The girl knows nothing. She's just a traumatized teenager who lost her father, Mrs. Thornfield." Morrison said quietly, "We've been investigating your husband's offshore accounts for 3 years. $50 million disappeared in the weeks before his death. Money that rightfully belongs to his business partners, some of whom are not the patient type. If you understand my meaning, $50 million, Annie's head spun. Her father had been wealthy, but this sounded like something else entirely, something dark and dangerous. The flashlight beams were getting closer. Annie could hear Catherine's heels clicking across the stone pathway, leading directly to the greenhouse. She had maybe 60 seconds before they discovered her hiding place. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Emma. "Everything okay? Saw police cars at your house on social media." Annie typed quickly, "Need help. Can you pick me up at the old cemetery on Maple Street? Emergency." Emma's response was immediate. "On my way. 10 minutes." Annie looked down at the bracelet one more time. The symbol seemed brighter now, more defined. One pattern looked distinctly like a bird in flight, another resembled a compass rose, and the third looked exactly like the logo she'd seen on signs around town for Webb and Associates. The footsteps stopped just outside the greenhouse door. "In there." Catherine's voice was cold and certain. "She's always loved this place." Annie slipped out through a gap in the back wall that she'd discovered years ago, during games of hide-and-seek with her father. As she crawled through the opening, a piece of broken glass caught her jacket, tearing it with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. "Did you hear that?" Morrison's voice sharpened. Annie ran. Across the dark gardens, over the stone wall that bordered the estate, through the woods that led to town. Behind her, shouts erupted as they discovered her escape route. Flashlights swept frantically through the trees, but Annie knew these woods better than anyone. 15 minutes later, she collapsed into Emma's car at the cemetery, gasping and shivering. "Annie, what's going on?" Emma demanded, pulling away quickly. "You look terrified." Annie held up her wrist, the bracelet catching the dashboard light. "This," she whispered, "it all comes back to this." Emma Martinez had been Annie's best friend since 3rd grade, but she'd never seen her like this, wild-eyed, shivering, and clutching that old silver bracelet like her life depended on it. "Start from the beginning," Emma said, driving aimlessly through the quiet streets of Millbrook. "What happened at your house tonight?" Annie took a shaky breath and pulled out her father's letter. "Remember how I told you my dad left me this bracelet when he died? I think it's connected to something big, something dangerous." She explained about the investigators, Detective Morrison's questions, and Catherine's strange behavior. Emma listened in growing amazement as Annie described the mysterious symbols that seemed to appear and disappear on the bracelet's surface. $50 million? Emma whistled low. "Annie, your dad was involved in some serious stuff. He wasn't a criminal," Annie said defensively. "My father was a good man." He donated millions to charity, supported the children's hospital, helped dozens of families in town. I'm not saying he was bad, Emma said gently, but people don't usually hide $50 million unless they're protecting it from someone. Worse, they stopped at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. At nearly midnight, they were the only customers besides a trucker nursing black coffee at the counter. Annie ordered hot chocolate, hoping it would stop her hands from shaking. Look, she said, holding up the bracelet under the diner's harsh fluorescent lights. Do you see anything unusual? Emma studied it carefully. It's beautiful, but I don't see any symbols. They're only visible sometimes, Annie said, frustrated. In certain lights, at certain angles. Maybe it has to do with temperature or weight. She'd been unconsciously rubbing the bracelet while talking, and suddenly the symbols blazed to life under her touch. Emma gasped as delicate patterns emerged across the silver surface like invisible ink under heat. That's impossible, Emma breathed. How is it doing that? I don't know, Annie said, staring at the markings. But look at this one. She pointed to the logo-like symbol. I've seen this before. Webb and Associates. My father mentioned them in his letter. Emma pulled out her phone and searched quickly. Webb and Associates, downtown Millbrook. They're estate planners and private wealth managers, pretty high-end stuff. They're open tomorrow, Annie said, reading over Emma's shoulder. Maybe this Marcus Webb can explain what's happening. Annie, Emma said seriously, if the police are looking for you, and if there really is $50 million involved, you could be in real danger. Maybe we should call your mom or something. Catherine isn't my mother, Annie said bitterly. She married my dad 6 months before he died. 6 months. She was a nurse at the hospice where he was getting treatment. The whole thing was suspicious. Emma's eyes widened. You think she married him for his money? I think she married him because she knew he was dying and wealthy, Annie said. But maybe she didn't know about this. She touched the bracelet again, and the symbols pulsed brighter. There's something else, Annie continued, lowering her voice. Catherine was asking me weird questions last week about whether my father ever gave me anything special, whether he had any safe deposit boxes or secret accounts I knew about. At the time, I thought she was just being nosy, but now you think she's been looking for whatever you're wearing, Emma finished. Exactly. The trucker at the counter stood up, dropping a $10 bill and heading for the door. As he passed their booth, he glanced at Annie's bracelet. His step faltered almost imperceptibly, and his eyes lingered on the silver band for just a moment too long. After he left, Emma leaned forward urgently. Did you see that? The way he looked at your bracelet? You're being paranoid, Annie said, but even as she spoke, she felt a chill run down her spine. Through the diner's large windows, she could see the trucker in his cab, talking animatedly on his phone. We need to get out of here, Emma said, standing quickly and dropping money on the table. As they hurried to the car, Annie caught a glimpse of the trucker's license plate, Nevada, a long way from their small Connecticut town. Too much of a coincidence. Emma, Annie said as they pulled out of the parking lot, I don't think we can go to your house. If people are really looking for me, they might check with my friends. Then where? Emma asked, checking her rearview mirror nervously. Annie thought about her father's letter, about his warning to trust no one completely. But she had to trust someone, and Emma had been her best friend for 7 years. There's a motel on Route 9, Annie said. We can stay there tonight and figure out what to do in the morning. As they drove through the dark streets, Annie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The bracelet felt increasingly warm against her skin, and the symbols continued to glow whenever she touched them. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the rumble of a large truck engine following them. The Sleepy Inn motel was exactly as depressing as its name suggested, peeling paint, flickering neon, and the kind of carpet that had seen too many secrets. But it offered something precious to Annie, anonymity. Emma paid cash for the room, while Annie waited in the car, baseball cap pulled low over her face. The desk clerk barely looked up from his late-night TV show, taking the money and sliding over a key attached to a plastic diamond. Room 237 smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, but it had the beds and a deadbolt. Annie immediately went to the window, peering through the stained curtains at the parking lot below. See anything? Emma asked, setting down a bag of supplies they grabbed from a 24-hour convenience store. Maybe, Annie said uncertainly. A dark pickup truck had pulled into the far corner of the lot, its headlights off. There's a truck that might be the same one from the diner. Emma joined her at the window. The truck sat motionless, too far away to see the license plate or driver clearly. This is crazy, Emma said, sinking onto one of the beds. Yesterday you were worried about your history test, and now we're hiding in a motel from mysterious truckers and missing millions. Annie sat cross-legged on the other bed, studying her father's letter again. Emma, my father wrote this 7 years ago, when I was just a little girl. But everything he said is happening now. How did he know? Maybe he didn't know, Emma suggested. Maybe he was just being careful. No, Annie said slowly. Look at this part again. When you turn 18, seek out Marcus Webb. Not if you need help. Not if something happens. When, like he knew I'd need to find this Webb guy in exactly 4 years. Annie rubbed the bracelet absently, and once again the symbols materialized. This time, though, she noticed something new. The bird symbol seemed to be pointing in a specific direction, like a compass needle. Emma, do you have a real compass in your car, from when you were in Girl Scouts? Yeah, in my glove compartment. Why, I want to test something. Emma retrieved the compass, and they placed it next to Annie's extended wrist. The bracelet's bird symbol was pointing almost due north, while the compass needle pointed about 20 degrees east of that. It's not pointing to magnetic north, Annie said excitedly. It's pointing to something else. Like what? I don't know. But Annie pulled out her phone and opened the Maps app. If we draw a line from here going in the direction the symbol is pointing, her finger traced across the screen. It goes through downtown Millbrook and keeps going toward Hartford. Where in Hartford? Annie zoomed in on the map. The financial district, where all the big banks and law firms are located. Emma stared at her friend with new respect. You're really smart. You know that? My father always said intelligence runs in our family, Annie replied, but her voice caught. He used to tell me stories about my grandmother Elena, how she was brilliant and strong and never let anyone push her around. He said the women in our family were special, that we had gifts others didn't understand. What kind of gifts? Annie held up the bracelet. Maybe this kind. A soft knock at the door made both girls freeze. It was nearly 2 a.m. No one should be knocking. On their door, the knock came again, more insistent. Room service? A gruff voice called out. Emma and Annie exchanged terrified glances. The motel didn't offer room service. Annie crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A large man in a baseball cap stood outside, his hands in his jacket pockets. She could see the edge of a dark truck behind him. What do you want? She called through the door. Looking for a young lady with a silver bracelet. The man replied. Got some people real interested in talking to her. Annie's blood ran cold. They've been found already. Wrong room. Emma called out loudly. We're just trying to sleep. Now, I know that ain't true, the man said, and his voice carried a distinct threat. Saw you girls at the diner earlier. Real pretty bracelet you got there, miss. Annie looked around the room desperately. There was a window in the bathroom that might be big enough to crawl through. She grabbed Emma's arm and pointed silently toward the back of the room. Tell you what, the man continued. You come out here and have a little conversation with my associates and nobody gets hurt. We just want to take a look at that jewelry, maybe work out a deal. Associates, Emma whispered, through the peephole. Annie could see the more men emerging from the shadows. One was the trucker from the diner. The other was someone she recognized with a shock of terror, Vincent Marcelli, a man whose face had been on the news a few years ago, in connection with organized crime investigations. Her father's business had been completely legitimate, she'd always believed. But if Vincent Marcelli was interested in her bracelet, then her father's warning about dangerous people was more serious than she'd ever imagined. The bathroom window was painted shut, and too small anyway. They were trapped. 5 seconds, the man outside called. Then we come in. Anyway, Annie looked at the bracelet on her wrist, its symbols now blazing so brightly they cast shadows on the wall. Whatever secret it contained, people were willing to kill for it, and in 4 hours, the banks would open, and she could finally seek out Marcus Webb for answers if she lived that long. The motel room's back wall shared space with a storage closet that connected to the neighboring room. Annie had noticed the flimsy door when they'd first entered, and now it might be their salvation. The maintenance closet, she whispered to Emma, pointing to a narrow door beside the bathroom. If the connecting room is empty. Emma nodded and quietly turned the handle. The door opened into a cramped space filled with cleaning supplies and a water heater. On the far side was another door, presumably leading to room 235. I'm coming in now, ladies, the man outside announced. Annie heard the distinctive sound of a key, card sliding through the electronic lock. He'd either bribed or intimidated the desk clerk. The girls slipped into the maintenance closet just as their room door opened. Through the thin walls, they could hear heavy footsteps and angry voices. They were here. Vincent Marcelli's gravelly voice was unmistakable. Bed still warm. Check the bathroom, another voice ordered. Emma tried the handle to room 235, locked, but the door was old and the wood around the lock was soft with age. She pressed her shoulder against it and pushed steadily. With a quiet crack, the door gave way. Room 235 was identical to theirs but mercifully empty. They crept through the darkness to the front window and peered out. 3 more men were stationed around the parking lot, all of them watching the building's exits. "We can't get to my car," Emma whispered. "That we call for help," Annie replied, pulling out her phone. But who could they call? The police might be legitimate, but Detective Morrison had been at her house asking questions about missing money. Catherine couldn't be trusted, and Annie didn't know anyone else who might believe their story about mysterious bracelets and dangerous men. "Wait," Annie said suddenly. "My father's letter mentioned Marcus Webb. Maybe he has an emergency number. Something for after hours." She searched online for Webb and Associates and found their website. It was professional and minimal, but at the bottom was a line that made her heart leap. 24-hour emergency estate services available. The emergency number connected immediately. Marcus Webb speaking. The voice was crisp and alert despite the early hour. "Mr. Webb, this is Annie Thornfield. Richard Thornfield was my father. I need your help." There was a pause. "Annie, I've been expecting your call, though not quite this soon." "Where are you?" "At a motel on Route 9, the Sleepy Inn. There are men here looking for me." "Dangerous men. They want something my father left me. The bracelet." Marcus said immediately. "Are you wearing it now?" "Yes. And Mr. Webb, it's doing things. Strange things. The symbols on it are glowing. That means you're in immediate danger." Marcus said urgently. "The bracelet responds to threats." "How many men?" "At least 6 that I can see." "Stay on the line. I'm tracing your phone to get your exact location through the walls." They could hear the men searching room 237. Furniture was being moved, drawers pulled out, and voices were getting angrier. "They're not here," one man was saying. "Couldn't have gone far on foot. Check the other rooms," Marcelli ordered. "Every room in this dump if you have to." Eddie's heart sank. They had maybe minutes before the men worked their way to room 235. "Mr. Webb," she whispered into the phone, "I don't think we have much time. I'm 10 minutes away." He replied, "But Annie, I need you to do exactly as I tell you. Touch the bracelet with your left index finger and hold it for 5 seconds. Annie pressed her finger to the silver band. Instantly, the symbols erupted in brilliant light that was somehow visible only to her. The bird symbol spun like a compass needle and pointed directly toward the room's front door. "It's pointing toward the front of the building," she reported. "Good. That means help is coming from that direction. The bracelet is ancient, Annie. It was designed to protect your bloodline. Your great-great-grandmother wore it during the Civil War. Your great-grandmother never removed it during the Great Depression. Your grandmother Eleanor wore it through World War II. What does it do exactly? It connects you to people who've sworn to protect your family. There's a network, Annie. People your father trusted with his life and yours." A key card beeped at their door. Emma grabbed Annie's arm in terror. "Mr. Webb," Annie breathed into the phone. "I'm here." Marcus's voice came from right outside their window. Annie looked out and saw a distinguished man in his 50s, wearing a long coat and carrying what looked like a briefcase. But he wasn't alone, for other people flanked him. 2 men and a woman, all moving with the coordinated precision of a train team. "Time to go," Marcus said through the phone and the window simultaneously. The door to their room began opening just as Annie and Emma slipped out the window. Marcus Webb caught Annie's arm as she landed, his eyes immediately going to the bracelet. "It's really her," he said to his companions. "Eleanor's great-granddaughter." "Sir," one of the women reported, "we have 6 hostiles inside the building and at least 3 more in vehicles around the perimeter." "Standard extraction protocol," Marcus ordered. "No unnecessary violence, but priority 1 is the girl's safety." As they moved quickly toward a line of black SUVs, Annie heard shouts from inside the motel. The men had discovered their escape route. "Mr. Webb," Annie said as they reached the vehicles, "what did my father really do? And why is everyone so interested in this bracelet?" Marcus paused with his hand on the SUV door. "Your father, Annie, was one of the most important financial architects of his generation. And that bracelet isn't just jewelry. It's the key to a fortune that's been accumulating in secret for over a century. A fortune now worth considerably more than $50 million. Behind them, men poured out of the motel, shouting and pointing in their direction. How much more? Annie asked as they drove away into the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Try $500 million. The safe house was a modest Victorian home in Hartford's historic district, the kind of place that looked entirely ordinary from the street. But as Marcus Webb led Annie and Emma through the front door, it became clear that appearances were deceiving. The interior was a sophisticated command center disguised as a family residence. Computer monitors lined one wall, communication equipment hummed quietly in corners, and several people worked at stations that looked like something from a high-tech security firm. "Welcome to the real Webb and Associates," Marcus said, hanging up his coat. "Your father helped design this place, Annie. He knew that Sunday you might need sanctuary." It was 4 a.m., and Annie felt like she was living in a dream. 7 hours ago, she'd been a normal teenager hiding in her father's study. Now she was apparently the heir to a secret fortune, and under the protection of what seemed like a private intelligence agency. "I don't understand any of this," she said, sinking into a leather chair. "My father sold insurance and invested in real estate. He was normal." "Your father was many things," Marcus replied, "but normal wasn't one of them. Richard Thornfield was brilliant, paranoid, and absolutely devoted to protecting his family's legacy." He opened a thick file folder and spread photographs across the coffee table. Annie gasped as she recognized her father in pictures spanning decades, but he was with people she'd never seen before, in places she'd never known him to visit. Switzerland, 1995. Marcus pointed to one photo, your father establishing the first of 17 offshore accounts. The Cayman Islands, 1998. Hong Kong, 2003. Every major financial center in the world. "But why?" Annie asked. "We lived comfortably, but we weren't incredibly wealthy. At least, it never seemed that way." "Because your father knew someone was coming for the family fortune eventually," Marcus explained. "The Thornfield wealth goes back 5 generations, Annie. Your great-great-grandfather Samuel Thornfield made his money in railroads during the Civil War. Not all of it was entirely legal." Emma, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "You're saying Annie's family money is dirty?" "I'm saying it's complicated," Marcus replied. "Samuel Thornfield transported supplies for the Union Army, but he also smuggled goods for the Confederacy. He played both sides and profited enormously. When the war ended, certain parties wanted their investments back." Annie touched the bracelet, and the symbols flared to life. "This belonged to Samuel's wife, didn't it? Your great-great-grandmother Victoria. She designed it with the help of a brilliant Swiss clockmaker, who was also a member of a secret society dedicated to protecting accumulated wealth. The symbols aren't just decorative, they're a complex code that leads to account numbers, safety deposit boxes, and trust funds scattered across the globe. And my father knew all this?" "Your father spent his entire adult life mapping the network Victoria created. Every symbol on that bracelet corresponds to a piece of the puzzle. When fully assembled, they reveal the location of assets worth over $500 million. Annie stared at the bracelet with new eyes. The bird symbol, the compass rose, the intricate geometric patterns. They weren't just pretty designs. They were literally a treasure map wrapped around her wrist. "But if my father knew all this, why didn't he just collect the money?" she asked. "Because," Marcus said grimly, "certain people have been looking for the Thornfield fortune for over a century. The descendants of Samuel's Confederate business partners, organized crime families who believe they're owed a piece of the profits, government agencies think the money should be seized as proceeds from illegal activities." "Like Vincent Marcelli," Annie said, remembering the man from the motel. "Vincent Marcelli represents the Corleone family interests," Marcus confirmed. "They've been searching for the Thornfield assets since the 1920s, when your great-grandfather made the mistake of using their money laundering services." One of Marcus's assistants approached their group. "Sir, we're picking up increased chatter. Multiple parties are mobilizing. Word is out that the girl has been located." "How many parties?" Marcus asked. "At least for distinct groups. The Marcelli Organization, a federal task force, Catherine Thornfield and her associates," and he paused. "Someone else, high-level, sophisticated. They're using encrypted communications we can't break." Annie felt the weight of generations pressing down on her. "What happens if I just give them the bracelet? Would that end this?" "Annie," Marcus said seriously, "that bracelet only responds to Thornfield DNA. Remove it from your wrist, and it becomes just another piece of silver jewelry. The symbols disappear forever, and the fortune remains hidden. But if you keep it, you'll spend the rest of your life either running from people who want to kill you for it, or using it to claim one of the largest private fortunes in American history. Annie looked at Emma, who had been her constant companion through this impossible night. What would you do? Emma considered carefully. Your dad left you that letter for a reason. He could have destroyed the bracelet, could have let the secret die with him. But he didn't. He gave it to you and told you to be brave. The bracelet pulsed warm against Annie's skin, and for a moment she could almost feel the presence of all the women who had worn it before her. Victoria, who had hidden a fortune during the chaos of civil war. Elena, who had protected family assets through economic collapse and global conflict. And her father, who had spent his life preparing for this moment. Mr. Webb, Annie said quietly, if I decide to claim this inheritance, what exactly would that involve? Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd met him. First, we'd need to decipher every symbol on that bracelet. Then we'd need to visit banks and safety deposit box facilities in 12 different countries, and we'd need to do it all while staying one step ahead of people who are very motivated to stop us. Annie touched the bracelet one final time. The symbols blazed brighter than ever before, as she realized they weren't just showing her the way to a fortune. They were showing her the way to answers about who she really was and what she was capable of becoming. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over Hartford, and somewhere in the distance, Annie could hear the sound of approaching helicopters. The helicopters weren't coming for them. They were medical choppers heading to Hartford Hospital. But the sound made everyone in the safe house tense, and Annie realized how dangerous her new reality had become. We need to move quickly, Marcus said, spreading detailed maps across the table. The first location is here in Hartford, First National Bank, downtown. Your great-great-grandmother Victoria opened a safety deposit box there in 1863, just 3 months after the Battle of Gettysburg. Annie studied the bracelet symbols in the morning light, streaming through bulletproof windows. The bird symbol was pointing southeast now, directly toward downtown Hartford. How do we know the box is still there after all these years? Emma asked. Because, Marcus smiled, the Thornfield family has been paying the annual fee for 161 years. Victoria set up a trust specifically to maintain access to that box. Your father continued the payments right up until his death. One of Marcus's team members, a woman named Sarah Chen, approached with a laptop. Annie, we need to create your documentation. The bank will require multiple forms of identification to access a box that old. What kind of documentation? Birth certificate, DNA verification, family genealogy records, and Sarah paused. We need to establish that you're legally entitled to make decisions about family assets. But I'm only 14, Annie said. Don't I need a guardian's permission? Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. That's where things get complicated, Marcus said carefully. Catherine Thornfield is legally your guardian, but she has no blood relationship to you. The safety deposit boxes and accounts can only be accessed by direct Thornfield descendants. What about the missing $50 million that Detective Morrison mentioned? Annie asked. Your father didn't steal that money, Marcus explained. He moved it. 3 weeks before he died, Richard transferred $50 million from his business accounts into the historical Thornfield Trust funds. His business partners considered it theft, but legally, he was just consolidating family assets. And he felt a chill, so he knew he was dying, and he wanted to make sure Catherine couldn't get the money. Catherine Blackwood, her maiden name, approached your father at the hospice where she worked, Sarah said, consulting her files, but she wasn't randomly assigned to his care. She specifically requested terminal patients with significant assets. She's done this before? Emma asked, horrified. 3 times that we can document. The elderly men and 1 woman, all wealthy, all of whom changed their wills shortly before death to benefit Catherine. Annie felt sick. My father married a serial killer. More like a serial gold digger, Marcus corrected, but the pattern is clear. Catherine identifies dying wealthy individuals, gains their trust, and manipulates them into marriage or changing their wills. Then why did my father marry her? Annie demanded. He was brilliant. He would have seen through her scheme. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Annie, your father was in tremendous pain in those final months. The cancer had spread to his brain. His judgment wasn't always clear, and Catherine is very skilled at what she does. The bracelet suddenly grew hot against Annie's wrist, and the symbols flared with urgent light. Sarah's computer began beeping rapidly. "We have a problem," Sarah announced. "Multiple vehicles approaching the safe house. Professional formation through the windows." Annie could see black SUVs blocking both ends of the quiet residential street. Men in suits were emerging from the vehicles, moving with military precision. "Federal agents," Marcus said grimly, watching through high-powered binoculars. "This isn't a raid. It's a negotiation. What do they want?" Annie asked. "The same thing everyone wants, access to the Thornfield fortune. But they want it for the U.S. Treasury, assets hidden offshore for over a century. Money that was never properly taxed." A knock came at the front door, polite but authoritative. "Mr. Webb," a voice called out. "This is Agent Patricia Reeves, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to speak with Miss Thornfield about her inheritance." Marcus looked at Annie seriously. "This is your choice. We can try to leave through the back exit, but they'll follow us, or you can talk to them and see what they're offering." "What would my father want me to do?" Annie asked. "Your father spent 20 years planning for this moment," Marcus replied. "He knew that eventually you'd have to choose between hiding forever and claiming your birthright." Annie touched the bracelet, and the symbol shifted into a new configuration she hadn't seen before. The pattern seemed to spell out coordinates, numbers that meant nothing to her, but everything to her family's hidden legacy. "Let them in," she said quietly. "But Mr. Webb, I want you to record everything they say." Agent Reeves was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair. She entered with two younger agents and immediately focused on Annie's bracelet. "Miss Thornfield," Agent Reeves said, "I'm going to be direct with you. The federal government believes your family has hidden assets that rightfully belong to the American people. Money earned through illegal activities, hidden to avoid taxation, and used to fund questionable investments over multiple generations." "What kind of illegal activities?" Annie asked. "Your great-great-grandfather Samuel Thornfield sold military supplies to both the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War. That's treason in wartime. The profits from those sales should have been seized by the government." Marcus leaned forward. "Agent Reeves, Samuel Thornfield was never charged with any crime. He was a legitimate businessman who provided essential supplies during a national emergency. Mr. Webb, we both know the truth is more complicated than that. Samuel Thornfield used his railroad connections to smuggle Confederate gold out of the South. In the final months of the war, gold that was stolen from Union banks and private citizens." Annie felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Every generation of her family had been involved in increasingly complex financial arrangements, and now she was supposed to untangle it all. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked Agent Reeves. "Cooperation. You help us locate and repatriate the hidden Thornfield assets, and the government will allow you to keep a reasonable portion as a finder's fee. 10% of whatever we recover. 10% of $500 million is $50 million, Emma calculated quickly. "That's more money than you could spend in a lifetime," Agent Reeves pointed out, "and you'd be free to live normally without looking over your shoulder constantly." Annie looked at the bracelet on her wrist. The symbols were pulsing now, almost like a heartbeat. For 161 years, 5 generations of women had protected these secrets. They'd endured war, economic collapse, persecution, and danger to preserve what Samuel and Victoria Thornfield had built. "Agent Reeves," Annie said slowly, "if I agree to help you, what guarantee do I have that the government won't just take everything and leave me with nothing? You have my word, and the word of the United States government." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Agent Reeves, with respect, the United States government seized Japanese-American assets during World War II, confiscated Native American land for centuries, and has a long history of breaking promises when money is involved. This is different," Agent Reeves insisted. "This is about recovering stolen assets and ensuring they're used for the public good." Annie stood up, and as she did, the bracelet symbols blazed so brightly that everyone in the room could see them clearly. The bird symbol was spinning rapidly, and the compass rose was pointing directly at Agent Reeves. "The bracelet thinks you're a threat," Annie said quietly. Agent Reeves stared at the glowing symbols with undisguised fascination. "Miss Thornfield, that artifact alone is worth millions to the right collector. Swiss clockwork from the 1860s, precious metals, and apparently some kind of chemical coating that responds to, what? Heat. Electromagnetic fields, DNA," Marcus said. "It responds to Thornfield DNA. Then it really is the key to everything." Agent Reeves breathed. Annie realized that everyone in the room, Marcus, Agent Reeves, even Emma, was staring at her bracelet with hunger in their eyes, the weight of her decision suddenly became clear. She was 14 years old, and she held the key to one of America's greatest hidden fortunes, and everyone wanted to use her to get it. I need time to think, Annie announced, causing a stir in the room. This is my family's legacy, and I'm not making any decisions under pressure. Agent Reeves checked her watch impatiently. Miss Thornfield, time is a luxury you don't have. Vincent Marcelli's people are mobilizing. Catherine Thornfield has hired her own team of mercenaries, and there are at least the other parties tracking your location as we speak. What other parties? Marcus asked sharply. Swiss banking interests, for one. Your family apparently has significant assets in Geneva that haven't been touched in decades. The banks are required by law to turn over dormant accounts to the government after a certain period. And the second party, Agent Reeves hesitated, a private collector, someone who specializes in acquiring unique historical artifacts. They're offering $20 million just for the bracelet, regardless of what it unlocks. Annie felt the bracelet pulse against her skin. $20 million for something she'd worn every day for 7 years without really understanding its value. Who is this collector? She asked. We don't know their real identity. They operate through intermediaries and shell companies, but they have resources that rival small governments. Sarah Chen approached Marcus with an urgent expression. Sir, we're detecting electronic surveillance. Someone is listening to this conversation. Marcus swore under his breath. Agent Reeves, your people aren't the only ones who found us. My people? Agent Reeves looked genuinely surprised. We're not running surveillance on this location. Then who is? Through the window, Annie saw a van parked across the street that hadn't been there before. Its windows were tinted black, and a small satellite dish was barely visible on its roof. We need to leave, Marcus said urgently. Now, where can we go? Emma asked. It seems like everyone knows where we are. Annie looked at the bracelet's symbols, which were shifting into yet another configuration. The bird symbol was pointing northwest now, toward what looked like mountain terrain on Marcus's maps. Vermont, she said suddenly. The bracelet is pointing toward Vermont. Marcus studied the maps quickly. There's a Thornfield property in Vermont, a cabin that's been in the family for generations. Your father mentioned it once, but I never connected it to the larger network. How do you know about it? Agent Reeves asked suspiciously, because Annie said, reading the symbols that were becoming clearer by the moment. It's written right here on the bracelet. Coordinates, elevation markers, even what looks like a property boundary description. Agent Reeves stared at the glowing patterns with new respect. Miss Thornfield, that bracelet is more sophisticated than anything we've seen in modern cryptocurrency security. Your great-great-grandmother was working with technology that's still advanced by today's standards. The Swiss clockmaker, Marcus said, Victoria Thornfield wasn't just commissioning jewelry. She was creating a data storage and security system using 19th century craftsmanship. The surveillance van across the street suddenly exploded into activity. Men poured out of the back, carrying equipment that looked distinctly military. Definitely not federal agents. Agent Reeves said grimly, my people don't dress like mercenaries. Marcus, Sarah called from her computer station. I'm picking up radio chatter. These guys are coordinating with at least the other teams. They're planning to surround the building. Annie made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Agent Reeves, if you really want to help me, then come with us. But we're not going to the FBI field office. And we're not turning over the bracelet to the government. We're going to Vermont to find out what my great-great-grandmother really left for us. Annie, I can't just abandon a federal investigation, Agent Reeves protested. Then stay here and deal with whoever is in that van. Annie replied, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life running from people who want to steal my family's legacy. Marcus was already gathering essential equipment and files. There's a back exit through the basement. It connects to a tunnel system that runs under 3 city blocks. Your father insisted on multiple escape routes when we designed this place, Agent Reeves. Annie said, you have 30 seconds to decide. Come with us and see where this mystery really leads. Or stay here and try to arrest people who are probably better armed than you are. Through the windows, they could see the mercenaries setting up some kind of electronic equipment pointed at the building. Signal jammers, Sarah reported. They're going to cut off all our communications. Agent Reeves looked at Annie with new respect. You know what? I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years, and this is the most interesting case I've ever encountered. Vermont it is. As they headed toward the basement, Annie felt the bracelet growing warmer against her skin. The The symbols were shifting rapidly now, displaying what looked like a countdown sequence. Marcus, she said urgently, I think the bracelet is trying to tell us something. The patterns are changing faster. Marcus looked at her wrist and his face went pale. Annie, those aren't just random symbols. They're showing elapsed time since activation. Activation of what? I think your great-great-grandmother built a timer into the bracelet. Something that starts counting down when the symbols are exposed to sustained examination. How long do we have? Marcus studied the rapidly shifting patterns. If I'm reading this correctly, about 18 hours. 18 hours until what? Agent Reeves demanded. Until every symbol on the bracelet disappears forever. Marcus said grimly, Victoria Thornfield built a self-destruct mechanism. If the bracelet is compromised or falls into the wrong hands, all the financial information encoded in it will be permanently erased. Annie stared at the silver band on her wrist with new understanding. Her great-great-grandmother hadn't just hidden a fortune, she booby-trapped it. And now Annie had less than 18 hours to claim her inheritance before it vanished forever. The sound of breaking glass came from upstairs as the mercenaries forced their way into the building. Move, Marcus ordered, leading them into the tunnel system beneath Hartford. As they ran through the underground passages, Annie realized that this was no longer just about money. It was about proving that 5 generations of Thornfield women had been smart enough, strong enough, and brave enough to outwit everyone who tried to steal what was theirs. And she was determined not to be the generation that failed. The tunnel system beneath Hartford was a maze of steam pipes, electrical conduits, and forgotten maintenance passages that dated back to the 1800s. Marcus led them through the labyrinth with the confidence of someone who had planned multiple escape routes for exactly this scenario. How long have you been working for my family? Annie asked as they navigated a particularly narrow section. 23 years, Marcus replied. Your father recruited me when I was fresh out of law school. He said he needed someone who understood both international finance and historical preservation. Agent Reeves was struggling to keep up, her FBI training not having prepared her for crawling through century-old tunnels. Mr. Webb, how did you know about these passages? Richard Thornfield spent 5 years mapping the underground infrastructure of every major city where the family had assets. He believed that escape routes were just as important as bank accounts. They emerged through a grate in the basement of a downtown office building, 3 blocks from the safe house. Marcus had keys to the building and led them to a parking garage where several vehicles waited. Under tarps, preparation, he explained to Annie's questioning look. Your father taught me that paranoia and planning are the same thing. Emma looked exhausted and overwhelmed. Annie, this is insane. We're running through tunnels with FBI agents, hiding from mercenaries, and chasing a treasure map that's tattooed on your wrist. This morning I was worried about my math homework. Annie touched her friend's arm gently. Emma, you can stay here. Marcus can arrange protection for you until this is over. Are you kidding? Emma replied. I'm not missing the end of this story. Besides, someone needs to keep you grounded. You're starting to sound like a character in an action movie. Marcus selected a nondescript Honda Accord from the collection of vehicles. Vermont is 3 hours away, but we're not taking the direct route. I want to stop at 2 locations first. What locations? Agent Reeves asked. The First National Bank downtown and a storage facility in West Hartford. If we're going to solve this puzzle, we need more pieces. As they drove through Hartford's morning traffic, Annie studied the bracelet's countdown sequence. The symbols were definitely moving faster now, and some of the patterns were beginning to fade. Around the edges, Marcus, what happens if the timer runs out before we find everything? Then the Thornfield fortune disappears forever. Your great-great-grandmother designed the bracelet to self-destruct if it was exposed for too long, or if someone tried to remove it from a Thornfield descendant. But why? If she wanted her family to inherit the money, why make it so difficult? Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Because Victoria Thornfield lived through the Civil War, Annie, she saw what happened when people fought over money. She wanted to make sure that only someone truly committed to the family legacy would be able to claim it. The First National Bank was an imposing granite building that had anchored downtown Hartford for over 150 years. Marcus parked in the visitor's lot and turned to address the group. Annie, you need to go in alone. The safety deposit box can only be accessed by a Thornfield descendant, and the bank security protocols are very strict about additional personnel. What am I looking for? Anything that helps decode the bracelet. Documents, keys, additional jewelry, maps. Victoria Thornfield was methodical about everything. Agent Reeves handed Annie a small device. It's a camera. Take pictures of anything you find. If this is evidence in a federal investigation, we need documentation. Annie hesitated. Agent Reeves, are you helping me or building a case against me? Honestly, I'm not sure anymore, but I want to see how this ends as much as you do. The bank's interior was all marble and brass, designed to convey permanence and security. Annie approached the reception desk with her collection of identification documents that Marcus had prepared. I'd like to access safety deposit box 1863A, she said to the elderly clerk. The woman's eyebrows rose. That's one of our oldest boxes. May I see your identification and authorization paperwork? Annie provided the documents, including the DNA verification that Marcus had somehow obtained. Overnight, the clerk studied everything carefully, then made several phone calls. Miss Thornfield, this is highly unusual. This box hasn't been accessed since 1987, when your father last visited. Are you certain you have authorization? My father died 7 years ago, Annie explained. I'm his only heir. The clerk led her through a series of security doors into the vault area. Box 1863A was located in the oldest section, where the boxes were larger and more ornate than modern versions. You'll need both your key and the bank's key, the clerk explained, inserting her key into one of two locks. Annie looked at the bracelet, and suddenly one of the symbols, a small key-shaped pattern, began glowing intensely. As she watched, the symbol seemed to detach from the bracelet's surface and reshape itself into an actual key made of the same silver material. The clerk gasped as Annie inserted the impossible key into the second lock. It fit perfectly. Inside the safety deposit box was a collection of items that made Annie's heart race. Old photographs, legal documents, a small leather journal, and another piece of jewelry. A silver pendant that matched her bracelet exactly. The pendant bore symbols that were different from her bracelet, but clearly part of the same system. As soon as Annie touched it, both pieces of jewelry began resonating, creating harmonics that filled the small vault room with a sound like distant church bells. What is that? The clerk whispered, staring at the glowing jewelry. Annie quickly gathered everything from the box and headed back toward the lobby. But as she reached the main floor, she saw through the windows that Marcus's Honda was surrounded by the same black vehicles they'd encountered at the safe house. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Compromised. Exit through rear. Storage unit key in your pocket. Address on paper and journal. Go without us. Annie felt a moment of panic. She was 14 years old, alone in a bank, carrying artifacts worth millions of dollars, and apparently everyone in Hartford was looking for her. But then she remembered her father's words, be brave, be smart, and she remembered what Marcus had said about Victoria Thornfield surviving the Civil War through intelligence and determination. Annie slipped out the bank's rear exit just as armed men entered through the front. She had the pendant, the journal, and a storage unit key. The bracelet's countdown showed less than 15 hours remaining, and somewhere in West Hartford was the next piece of a puzzle that had been waiting over 160 years for her to solve it. She caught a city bus heading west, trying to look like a normal teenager on her way to school instead of an heiress running for her life. As the bus pulled away from downtown, Annie opened Victoria Thornfield's journal and began reading her great-great-grandmother's account of hiding a fortune during America's bloodiest war. The first entry, dated July 15, 1863, began, "The war has shown me that money means nothing if you cannot protect those you love. Samuel believes I am merely keeping records, but I am building something far more important. I am building a legacy that will survive any war, any government, any enemy who tries to steal what we have earned. And I am building it for the daughters who will come after me." Annie smiled, feeling a connection across time to a woman she had never met, but was more like than she had ever imagined. The storage facility in West Hartford looked like hundreds of others across America, rows of metal buildings housing forgotten belongings and abandoned dreams. But as Annie approached Unit 147 with the key from the safety deposit box, she realized this was no ordinary storage space. The unit was climate-controlled, spotlessly clean, and filled with furniture covered in white sheets. As Annie pulled away the first sheet, she gasped. Underneath was an ornate Victorian desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. The pendant around her neck grew warm as she approached the desk, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't just storage, it was Victoria Thornfield's private office, preserved exactly as she had left it in 1863. Annie opened the desk's center drawer and found more journals, detailed maps, and correspondence that revealed the true scope of her great-great-grandmother's activities. Victoria hadn't just been Samuel's wife, she had been the mastermind behind the entire Thornfield financial network. One letter, dated August 1863, was particularly revealing. My dear sister Margaret, Samuel believes his railroad connections make him indispensable to both armies. But he does not see the larger picture. This war will end, but the hatred will continue. The Confederates we have served will not forget that we also supplied their enemies, and the Union commanders will not forgive our Confederate connections. I have therefore taken certain precautions. The gold we have acquired is being distributed among trusted parties in 7 different states. The documents proving our ownership are hidden in locations that only our daughters will be able to find, and I am creating a key that will ensure our family's survival. Regardless of which side wins this terrible conflict, should anything happen to Samuel and myself, you must ensure that our daughter Elizabeth understands her inheritance. The bracelet I have commissioned is not merely jewelry, it is a map, a key, and a guardian all-in-one. Teach her to be strong, Margaret. The women of our family will need to be stronger than the men. Annie felt a chill reading about Elizabeth, the daughter she'd never known existed. According to the family tree in her father's documents, Elizabeth was Victoria's only child, who would have been Annie's great-grandmother, but according to everything Annie had been told, her great-grandmother was named Eleanor, not Elizabeth. She continued reading Victoria's correspondence and found the answer in a letter dated 1867. Elizabeth has chosen to change her name to Eleanor, saying that Elizabeth Thornfield died with the war and Eleanor Thornfield was born with the peace. I understand her desire for a fresh beginning, though I pray she will not forget the lessons that Elizabeth learned. Annie realized she was reading the origin story of her entire family. Every generation had faced danger, had been forced to adapt and survive, and had passed down both wealth and wisdom to their daughters. The pendant was growing warmer, and Annie noticed that when she held it close to her bracelet. Both pieces of jewelry displayed new symbols that weren't visible when they were separated. The combined patterns showed what looked like a detailed map of New England, with specific locations marked by tiny pulsing lights. Her phone rang, startling her in the quiet storage unit. It was Emma. Annie, where are you? Marcus and Agent Reeves got away from the bank, but they're worried sick. There are news reports about armed men in downtown Hartford, and the FBI is calling it a terrorist investigation. I'm fine, Annie said, but Emma, I found something incredible. Victoria Thornfield wasn't just hiding money, she was building an entire shadow financial system. There are assets hidden all over New England. How much money are we talking about? Annie looked at the maps and calculations in Victoria's journals. Emma, I think the 500 million estimate was conservative. The compound interest over 160 years, the property appreciations, the investments. This could be worth over $1 billion. $1 billion? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. But there's a problem. The bracelet's countdown is accelerating. Something about combining it with the pendant has sped up the timer. I think I have maybe 8 hours before everything self-destructs. Where do you need to go next? Annie studied the combined symbols from both pieces of jewelry. Vermont, the cabin Marcus mentioned. But it's not just a cabin, according to these maps. It's the location of Victoria's master vault, the place where she hid the most important documents and assets. Annie, the news is saying that multiple federal agencies are involved now. The FBI, Treasury Department, even Homeland Security. They're treating this like a national security issue. Annie felt the weight of history pressing down on her. For 160 years, 5 generations of Thornfield women had successfully hidden one of America's largest private fortunes. Now, in the span of 24 hours, it had become a federal case involving organized crime, international banking, and what sounded like domestic terrorism charges. Emma, tell Marcus to meet me in Vermont, but not at the cabin. I'll text you coordinates for a meeting place, and tell Agent Reeves that if she really wants to solve this case, she needs to stop thinking like a federal agent and start thinking like a Thornfield woman. What does that mean? Annie looked around Victoria's preserved office, at the evidence of a brilliant woman who had outmaneuvered armies, governments, and criminals for decades. It means being smarter than everyone who underestimates you, braver than everyone who tries to intimidate you, and more determined than everyone who wants to steal what's rightfully yours. As she prepared to leave the storage unit, Annie noticed one final item she had missed. A small wooden box hidden behind the desk. Inside was a third piece of jewelry, a silver ring that matched both the bracelet and pendant. When she slipped the ring onto her finger, all three pieces of Victoria's creation resonated together, and suddenly Annie could see the complete picture. The symbols weren't just showing her where to find hidden assets, they were showing her how to access a financial network that had been growing in secret for over a century. But they were also showing her something else. As the three pieces of jewelry worked together, new symbols appeared that looked distinctly like warning signs. Victoria Thornfield had built safeguards into her system, traps for anyone who tried to claim the inheritance without understanding its full history. Annie realized that claiming the Thornfield fortune wouldn't just make her wealthy, it would make her the target of every criminal organization, government agency, and private collector who believed they deserved a piece of what Victoria had built. As she drove the rental car toward Vermont, Annie understood that she wasn't just following a treasure map. She was walking in the footsteps of the strongest, smartest, most dangerous women in her family's history, and in less than 8 hours, she would either join their ranks or lose everything they had died to protect. The countdown on her bracelet seemed to pulse faster with each mile she drove north, and Annie could swear she heard Victoria Thornfield's voice whispering across the centuries, "Be strong, child. The true test is just beginning." The Vermont cabin sat on 50 acres of pristine mountain wilderness, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that twisted through dense forest. As Annie approached in her rental car, she could see why Victoria Thornfield had chosen this location. It was beautiful, isolated, and easily defended. The cabin itself looked modest from the outside, but Annie's jewelry was resonating so intensely now that she could barely concentrate on driving. The bracelet, pendant, and ring were working together like a sophisticated security system, and they were clearly recognizing their destination. Annie parked and approached the front door cautiously. The Vermont property had been maintained by a trust for over 160 years, just like the safety deposit box, but no one in the family had actually visited since her father's death. The door was solid oak with an unusual lock that featured 3 separate keyholes arranged in a triangle pattern. Annie held up her jewelry, and once again, the symbols began reshaping themselves into physical keys. This time, she needed all 3 pieces to unlock the door. Inside, the cabin was a revelation. What had appeared to be a simple mountain retreat from outside was actually a sophisticated command center that would have impressed any modern intelligence agency. The main room contained maps covering every wall, filing cabinets with meticulously organized documents, and display cases filled with artifacts from multiple historical periods. But most impressive was the central table, where Victoria Thornfield had created a 3-dimensional model of her entire financial network. Miniature buildings represented banks, tiny roads showed transportation routes, and small flags marked the locations of hidden assets across 7 states. Annie's jewelry was glowing so brightly now that the entire room was illuminated by silver light. As she approached the model, new details became visible that had been hidden for 160 years. The buildings and roads weren't just representations, they were actual storage containers filled with microscopic documents. Using a magnifying glass she found on the table, Annie could see that each miniature building contained rolled papers smaller than rice grains. Victoria had created the ultimate backup system, encoding her entire financial network in a format that would survive any technology or political change. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Coming up the mountain road. FBI roadblocks 2 miles behind us. Whatever you're going to do it fast." Annie looked at the countdown on her bracelet. 3 hours and 17 minutes. But as she stood in Victoria's command center, she realized the countdown wasn't just a self-destruct timer. It was synchronized with something else. A mechanical sound began emanating from beneath the cabin floor. Annie followed the sound to a section of floorboards that felt different from the others. When she pressed down with her foot, a hidden panel slid aside, revealing a staircase leading into the mountain itself. The underground chamber was Victoria Thornfield's masterpiece. Carved directly into the bedrock, it contained a library, laboratory, and what could only be described as a treasure room. Gold bars were stacked along one wall, rare artwork hung in climate-controlled cases, and a massive safe dominated the center of the space. But Annie was drawn to the library, where Victoria's most personal journals were preserved. The final entry, dated December 1867, revealed the truth about the Thornfield inheritance. "I am dying, and Samuel has been dead these 4 years. Elizabeth has chosen her new name and her new life, but she does not yet understand what I have built for her and her daughters. The money is only part of the legacy. The real inheritance is the network itself, the connections, the knowledge, the ability to move assets and information across any border or through any crisis. I have created a system that will allow our family to survive the collapse of governments, the destruction of currencies, and the greed of those who would steal what we have earned. But power requires responsibility. Each generation must prove themselves worthy before they can access the full network. The jewelry I have created will test their intelligence, their courage, and their determination. Only someone who understands both the value and the danger of what we have built should be trusted with its control. Elizabeth is strong, but she is still young. I pray that by the time our great-granddaughter comes of age, the world will be safer for women like us. But if it is not, I have given her the tools to protect herself and her children. The bracelet will guide her. The pendant will protect her. The ring will empower her. Together, they are the key to everything we have built. But more importantly, they are proof that she is truly one of us, smart enough to find the inheritance, brave enough to claim it, and strong enough to bear its responsibility. Annie felt tears on her cheeks as she read Victoria's final words to her. Across 160 years, her great-great-grandmother had been speaking directly to her, preparing her for this moment. The mechanical sound grew louder, and Annie realized that the countdown wasn't leading to destruction, it was leading to activation. Victoria had built a timer that would reveal the full scope of the Thornfield network, only when all three pieces of jewelry were brought together in this specific location. The massive safe in the center of the chamber began to open automatically, its complex mechanisms responding to the resonance from Annie's jewelry. Inside were documents that made everything else pale in comparison. Bank authorizations for accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Property deeds for land in 7 countries, contracts with private security firms, and instructions for accessing a network of trusted associates who had been waiting 160 years for a Thornfield heir to contact them. Footsteps echoed from the cabin above. Marcus, Emma, and Agent Reeves had arrived, but so had others. Annie could hear multiple voices, some of them distinctly threatening. Annie. Emma's voice carried down into the chamber. FBI agents are surrounding the cabin. But Annie was staring at the final document in Victoria's safe. A letter addressed simply to my great-great-granddaughter. My dear child, the letter began. If you are reading this, then you have proven yourself worthy of our family's true legacy. The money, the property, the gold, these are merely tools. The real inheritance is the knowledge that women like us do not wait for the world to give us what we deserve. We take it, we protect it, and we use it to protect those we love. You now have access to resources worth over $1 billion. But more importantly, you have access to a network of allies who have sworn to protect the Thornfield bloodline. Use both wisely, trust carefully, and remember that every choice you make will echo through the generations that come after you. The world will try to take what is yours. Governments will claim it belongs to them. Criminals will try to steal it. But you are a Thornfield woman, and we do not surrender what we have earned. Be strong, my child. The future of our family is in your hands. Annie folded the letter carefully and looked around the treasure chamber that Victoria had built. The countdown on her bracelet showed 37 minutes remaining, but now she understood what would happen when it reached 0. The chamber would seal itself permanently, protecting the inheritance until another Thornfield descendant could find it decades in the future. Annie, Marcus's voice was urgent now. We need to leave immediately. Annie gathered the most important documents and stuffed them into a waterproof bag. She found in the safe the original jewelry designs, bank account numbers, contact information for the network of allies, and property deeds that would make her one of the wealthiest teenagers in American history. As she climbed back up to the cabin, she could see through the windows that the situation had become dire. Federal agents had surrounded the building, but they weren't alone. Vincent Marcelli's men were positioned in the tree line, and a third group she didn't recognize was approaching from the north. Annie, Agent Reeves said as she emerged from the underground chamber, "This has become a federal incident. I need you to surrender the jewelry and all documents you found. For your own protection, Agent Reeves," Annie replied, "with respect. My protection isn't your priority. In control of the Thornfield assets is." Marcus was studying the situation through binoculars. "We have a problem. Multiple agencies are involved now, but they're not coordinating. This could turn into a firefight with us in the middle." Annie looked at the countdown. 23 minutes. In less than half an hour, Victoria's safeguards would activate. the underground chamber would seal, and the opportunity to claim the full inheritance would be gone for another generation. But Annie realized she didn't need another generation. She had everything she needed right here, right now. "Marcus," she said quietly, "do you still have contacts with the Swiss banking network my father used?" "Yes, but Annie, now isn't the time for international wire transfers." "Actually," Annie smiled, feeling Victoria Thornfield's determination flowing through her veins. "Now is exactly the time." She pulled out her phone and began making calls using the contact information from Victoria's safe. Within minutes, she was speaking with private bankers in Geneva who had been waiting 160 years for a Thornfield heir to activate dormant accounts. As federal agents prepared to storm the cabin, as criminals closed in from the forest, and as the countdown ticked toward zero, 14-year-old Annie Thornfield quietly transferred $1 billion in assets from hidden accounts into new ones that only she could access. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, watching Annie work with calm efficiency. "What Thornfield women have always done." Annie replied, "Staying one step ahead of everyone who wants to steal what's ours." The final confrontation came not with guns or violence, but with the quiet authority of $2 billion moving through the international banking system at the speed of light. Annie sat calmly at Victoria's command table while chaos erupted around the cabin. Federal agents were shouting orders, Marcelli's men were positioning for an assault, and the mysterious third party was closing in from multiple directions. But Annie was focused on her phone, speaking in rapid succession to private bankers in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. Confirmed transfer of assets from Thornfield Trust Alpha to new secured accounts. She said into the phone, "Authorization code Victoria Elizabeth Ellen Annie 1863. Agent Reeves stared at her in amazement. "Annie, what are you doing?" "Learning from my great-great-grandmother," Annie replied. Victoria survived the Civil War not by fighting every battle, but by making sure she controlled the battlefield. The countdown on her bracelet showed 8 minutes remaining, but Annie was no longer worried about the timer. She understood now that Victoria's system wasn't designed to self-destruct. It was designed to transfer control to the next generation at exactly the right moment. Marcus was monitoring radio communications from the various groups surrounding them. "Annie, I'm hearing chatter about a coordinated assault. All 3 parties are planning to move simultaneously. Let them," Annie said calmly, ending another call with a bank in Hong Kong. "Emma, do you still have that camera Agent Reeves gave you?" "Yes." "Why? I want you to record what happens next. This is the moment the Thornfield family officially reclaims its place in the world." Annie stood up and walked to the cabin's front door. Through the windows, she could see dozens of armed men from various organizations, all of them focused on capturing a 14-year-old girl and the jewelry she wore. She opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "My name is Annie Thornfield, and I believe you're all here because of me." The various groups stopped their preparations and stared at the small figure standing fearlessly. On the cabin porch, Vincent Marcelli emerged from the tree line, flanked by 4 armed men. "Miss Thornfield, you've caused us considerable trouble. Hand over the bracelet, and we can end this peacefully." Agent Reeves appeared beside Annie, her FBI credentials visible. "Mr. Marcelli, you're interfering with a federal investigation. Stand down immediately." The leader of the third group stepped forward, and Annie was surprised to see a woman in an expensive business suit. "Miss Thornfield, I represent certain Swiss banking interests. We need to discuss the irregular transfers you've initiated." Annie smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like Victoria Thornfield must have looked when facing down Confederate generals and Union commanders during the Civil War. "I'm afraid you're all delayed," she said simply. The bracelet's countdown reached 0, and suddenly every piece of jewelry Annie wore blazed with brilliant silver light. But instead of self-destructing, they were displaying a new message in symbols that everyone could see clearly. Thornfield assets successfully transferred, new account authorization, complete network activation, confirmed. "Welcome, Annie Thornfield." The Swiss banker's phone began ringing frantically. She answered it, spoke rapidly in German, then looked at Annie with new respect. "The transfers are legitimate," she announced to the assembled groups. "All Thornfield assets have been moved to accounts with full international legal protection. Any attempt to seize these assets would require court orders in 17 different countries." Vincent Marcelli's face darkened. "Little girl, you may have moved the money, but you still have to live in the real world, and in the real world, people like me don't forget debts." Annie reached into her pocket and pulled out a document from Victoria's safe, a contract with a private security firm that had been protecting Thornfield interests for over a century. Mr. Marcelli, she said quietly, people like you also don't understand what it means to threaten a family that's been preparing for this conversation for 160 years. A dozen men in tactical gear materialized from the forest, moving with professional precision to surround Marcelli's group. The leader approached Annie and nodded respectfully. Miss Thornfield, Blackwater Security Solutions reporting for duty. We've been waiting for your activation signal. Agent Reeves looked around at the suddenly changed dynamics. Annie, you can't just hire private military contractors. There are laws. Agent Reeves, Annie replied, when you control $1 billion in legitimate assets, and when you have legal documentation going back to the Civil War, and when you have international banking protection, there are very few laws that actually apply to you. She turned to address all the groups surrounding the cabin. Gentlemen and lady, you all came here thinking you could take something from a 14-year-old girl. But what you found instead is the heir to one of America's oldest and most sophisticated financial networks, a network that has survived wars, depressions, and every attempt to destroy it for over a century. The mountain air was silent except for the sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Those helicopters, Annie continued, are carrying representatives from 7 different governments who would very much like to discuss tax treaties and legal protections with the Thornfield family. Trust, because when you move $1 billion through the international banking system in a single day, the world takes notice. Vincent Marcelli looked around at the tactical teams, the federal agents, and the approaching helicopters, then made a decision that probably saved his life. He ordered his men to withdraw. This isn't over, little girl, he called as they retreated toward their vehicles. Yes, it is, Annie replied. It's been over since 1863, when Victoria Thornfield proved that smart women don't fight battles they can't win. They change the rules of the game. As the various groups dispersed and the helicopters landed to begin formal negotiations about the Thornfield assets, Annie sat down on the cabin steps next to Emma. So Emma said, how does it feel to be a billionaire? Annie looked at the jewelry on her wrist, finger, and neck. The symbols were still glowing softly, but now they showed peaceful patterns instead of warnings and countdowns. Emma, Victoria Thornfield, spent her entire life building something that would protect her family forever. My father spent his life maintaining that protection, and now it's my turn to decide what to do with it. What are you going to do? Annie thought about the children's hospital her father had supported, about the families in their town who struggled financially, about all the good that could be done with $2 billion guided by a conscience. I'm going to use it the way Victoria always intended, she said, to protect the people I love, to help people who need it, and to make sure that girls like us never have to be afraid of anyone again. Agent Reeves approached them as the federal negotiators emerged from their helicopters. Annie, she said, I have to ask, how did you know all of this would work? You're 14 years old. How could you possibly have understood such a complex financial system? Annie smiled and touched the bracelet one final time. The symbol shifted to display a message in clear English. Intelligence is our inheritance. Strength is our gift. Courage is our choice. Agent Reeves, Annie said, I didn't figure it out. 5 generations of brilliant women figured it out and left me the instructions. All I had to do was be brave enough to follow them. As the sun set over the Vermont mountains, Annie Thornfield officially became one of the youngest billionaires in American history. But more importantly, she became the latest guardian of a legacy that had protected her family through every crisis. For over 160 years, the bracelet would never leave her wrist. The network would continue to grow, and someday, when she had a daughter or granddaughter of her own, Annie would teach her the most important lesson Victoria Thornfield had learned. During the Civil War, smart women don't wait for the world to give them what they deserve. They take it, they protect it, and they use it to make the world better for the women who come after them. The inheritance was complete. The legend would continue, and Annie Thornfield was just getting started.